It's your boy Charles. Charles on as well, just checking in. Hope you guys having a good evening. We are getting ready to delve into another book audio reaction. Let's go ahead and play it, and I'm gonna come back with my reaction. Appreciate it, guys.
Chapter 12 LA's on Fire. Today, Tupac Shakur is remembered as perhaps the fiercest West Coast rapper of all. But his roots were firmly East Coast. He lived in Manhattan and the Bronx until he was 14, when his family moved to Baltimore. His dad was absent, and he had few male role models in his life. The closest thing to a father figure was his mother's boyfriend, Kenneth "Legs" Sanders, an associate of Harlem drug kingpin Nicky Barnes, who eventually died from a crack-related heart attack. Hip-hop was the primary male influence in Tupac's life. Ice Cube, Public Enemy, KRS-One, LL Cool J, Big Daddy Kane, all them niggas was my daddy. 'Cause I ain't have none, he declared. It's like you're paying $10 for a whole lifestyle of gain. His greatest influence, however, was his mother, who instilled his fighting activist spirit. My great-grandmother was a slave, she said. My grandmother was a sharecropper. My mother was a factory worker, and I was a legal worker. Born in 1947 and raised Alice Williams in Lumberton, North Carolina, she said her father beat her mother, who brought Alice and her sister to the Bronx as children. Following the assassinations of Malcolm X in 1965 and Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, Alice joined the Black Panther Party, and that year she also married a party activist and Muslim named Lumumba Abdul Shakur, changing her name to Afeni Shakur. The surname was adopted by many in their circle to cast off their slave names. He was already married. Afeni was his second wife, acceptable according to the Islamic law he followed. He'd sleep with me sometimes. He'd sleep with her, Afeni said, referring to Lumumba's first wife, adding that she could have taken up with another man if she'd so chosen. She took care of the kids in the house, and me and Lumumba did our thing with the party. Afeni, as aggressive and strong-willed as any man in the organization, was ushered into the Black Panther leadership. She and Lumumba were jailed in 1969, along with 19 other members of the group, who became known as the Panther 21. They were charged with conspiring to bomb department stores, a police station, and railroad facilities, as well as murder police officers. Testimony was supplied by a trio of undercover officers who infiltrated the organization. The Panthers were under heavy scrutiny from law enforcement, including the FBI's counterintelligence program. J. Edgar Hoover, FBI director until his death in 1972, called them the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. For their trial, the Panthers found support in high places. Bail set at $100,000 for some of the arrested members was seen as excessively high, and a group of wealthy New York liberals came to their defense. In 1970, conductor Leonard Bernstein, who had recently stepped down as music director from the New York Philharmonic, and his wife hosted a fundraiser inviting dozens of influential arts and media figures, including Barbara Walters, to their Park Avenue apartment. They raised the money, but the gathering was widely mocked, most famously in Tom Wolfe's New York Magazine article, Radical Chic, That Party at Lenny's. Wolfe's piece portrayed the white guests as desperate to look edgy and cool, munching on Roquefort cheese morsels rolled in crushed nuts, and gushing over a Black Panther named Don Cox, whose words they found in Wolfe's description, so somehow black, so funky, so metrical. Afeni made bail before the others, and she set out to raise money on their behalf, including at Columbia University in Manhattan, where another New York Magazine piece described her as galvanically beautiful. If you don't want a race war in this country, there's got to be a class war, she told the students. Along the way, Afeni and her husband split up, and while out on bail, she became pregnant by a Black Panther named William Garland. After her bail was revoked, owing to the absconsion of some of her co-defendants, She returned to jail, where she remained until about a month before Tupac's birth, June 16, 1971. This child stayed in my womb through the worst possible conditions. I had to get a court order to get an egg to eat every day, she said. I had to get a court order to get a glass of milk every day. Afeni represented herself at trial, and ultimately she and the other Black Panther members were acquitted. Afterward, Afeni was a civil rights star for a time, invited to speak at universities. Tupac was born into this atmosphere of militant black activism, confronting an overbearing judicial system with a soupçon of glamour. Born Lazane Parish Crooks, his name was soon changed to Tupac Amaru Shakur, with his first and middle monikers taken from a martyred Incan emperor. She always raised me to think I was the Black Prince of the Revolution, he said. Afeni's associates, the first people Tupac knew, were a who's who of famous black revolutionaries from the era. Tupac's godmother, Assata Shakur, was found guilty of the 1973 murder of a New Jersey state trooper, but she broke out of prison and later fled to Cuba. Her brother, Mutulu Shakur, was convicted of aiding her escape. Mutulu, a renowned acupuncturist known for developing drug treatment programs, had an even closer relationship to Tupac. In 1975, he married Afeni, and they moved to a house in Harlem, where Tupac and Mutulu's son Maurice became close. Mutulu was accused of participating in a 1981 attempted robbery of an armored Brinks car containing $1.6 million in Rockland County, New York, which left 2 cops and a security guard dead. He became a fugitive, and the FBI put him on their 10 most wanted list, before finally catching him and sending him away for the rest of Tupac's life. Tupac's godfather, Geronimo Pratt, also served a lengthy sentence for the murder of a teacher, though his conviction was overturned in 1997. Assata Shakur remains in Cuba. In 2013, she was added to the FBI's list of most wanted terrorists. A hippie. Afeni, Tupac, and his half-sister, Setchwa, the daughter of Mutulu, moved constantly between Manhattan and the Bronx. Afeni raised her son to be an intellectual, punishing him by forcing him to read the New York Times. He wrote in his diary, composed poetry, and at age 12 performed in A Raisin in the Sun at the Apollo Theater, a fundraiser for Jesse Jackson. In 1985, Afeni, who struggled to maintain employment, moved the family to Baltimore, where they received welfare. The lights were sometimes shut off, and Tupac slept on a mattress without sheets. Tupac found inspiration at Baltimore School for the Arts, a free magnet secondary school where he studied acting, read Shakespeare and Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, and took ballet. He was always like, "Peace, peace," before people said peace, remembered his schoolmate Teresa Altos, who described him as a hippie. He also became friends with Jada Pinkett, whose celebrity would rival his own. They weren't attracted to each other. "There was a time when I was like, just kiss me. Let's just see how this goes," she said. "And when I tell you, it had to be the most disgusting kiss for us both." He was just on all the time, with an incredibly contagious personality, said Donald Hicken, who taught Tupac at the School for the Arts. He had charisma that was astounding. Considered by some a pretty boy, Tupac was defensive about his toughness. He continued writing poetry, but since poets were seen as wimps, he said he devoted more energy to hip-hop. Calling himself MC New York, his first rhyme, penned after a friend shot himself while playing with a firearm, advocated gun control, and he rapped at benefits for his mother's Black Panther affiliates. Afeni was smoking crack by his high school years, and Tupac's studies suffered. He said he was forced to read by candlelight. Concerned for their safety after a neighborhood murder, Afeni sent her children across the country to live with one of her associates, Linda Pratt, the wife of imprisoned Black Panther leader Geronimo Pratt. Tupac wasn't quite 17 when he arrived in Marin City, California, which was largely populated by poor African Americans, despite its location in wealthy Marin County across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. Tupac's mother soon followed her children out west, and the family moved to a housing project called the Jungle. Tupac didn't fit in. I dressed like a hippie. They teased me all the time. I couldn't play basketball, he said, adding that he was jumped by street gangs. With a Gumby-style haircut and an earring in his right ear, he attended the diverse Tamalpais High School. With a friend named Ray Love, he began performing with a rap act called Strictly Dope. His rhymes featured Fresh Prince-style whimsy. Tupac fought with his mother, who was in the throes of crack addiction. He dropped out of high school and bounced around, at one point moving in with the family of a 20-something woman named Lila Steinberg, who ran a poetry and music workshop. He was the sloppiest, messiest person I've ever lived with, said Steinberg. Once, when a cop showed up requesting they turn down their music, Tupac put on NWA's Fuck the Police to taunt him.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Charles. Charles and Ezra just checking in. So what do y'all think about that book, man? Pretty interesting, huh? Crazy, man. Interesting story. Listen, go ahead and leave your comments and subscribe to Charles and Ezra. Appreciate it.